Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another YouTube video. As per the title, we're going to be doing an entire overview of TvZ. It's going to be a multiple part series, so this is going to be the first video, and we're going to talk about early game, build order execution and transition, and then how to play out of the build, playing the mid game, play the late game, etc., etc. This series is part of an overall series, basically helping people get from Diamond 3 to M3. That just seems like a really hard process that a lot of people get stuck on towards the end of it, which is D1 to M3. So we'll be covering multiple videos per matchup. We'll stick to one or two builds. I'll be explaining as much as I can about the build, what to look for, what to prioritize in terms of build mechanics, game theory, etc., etc. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we have the TvZ here. It's going to be a 2cc Banshee opener that I played. And so this video specifically will be just covering early game stuff. I'll talk more about the mid game in a different video. We'll most likely be using multiple examples, or sorry, the same replay in different videos. Because it's going to have multiple examples, right? I'll be covering everything here from what you're looking for, mechanics, what to prioritize, etc., etc. So first, we'll start with the early game. The early game is honestly so important in that obviously it builds you up for mid-game momentum, but you really have... It's obvious that it's important, but the reason why it's often overlooked is because a lot of times people make mistakes, especially your opponents. So when your opponents are making mistakes, sometimes it's really hard to gauge if you played really good or if you just kind of got lucky that your opponent made mistakes. So for example, if I hit a 1-1 730 Marine tank push and maybe I did a good job of hitting the timing, but maybe I'm missing 15 supply worth of units. I go across the map, I still did the push anyway. It works still, and I think I did great. But in reality, my opponent actually made even more mistakes than I did. And the reason why I won wasn't so much because I played particularly well, but rather my opponent played worse. And that happens a lot, and you really have to be able to tell the difference between those two things. So the way we're going to prevent that from happening is by providing benchmarks, right? So what benchmarks are we looking for? How can we tell when a build is properly executed? As I said earlier, I'm going to be playing 2cc Banshee. Very safe, very classic opener that anyone can do. And in a lot of these Diamond to GM, Bronze to GM guides, oftentimes they stick to builds that are particularly easy to do, right? A lot of content on it, tons of videos, all that good stuff. So let's start with this SV Scout. Okay, so let me rewind here a little bit. We tend to SV Scout with the SV that builds the barracks, okay? I'm going to be breaking this down to the lowest level, so if this is information you already know, feel free to skip ahead. But the reason why we're doing this is the SCV that builds the barracks scouts here, because the way the timing works is that by the time this SCV gets here, if there's already creep, as in the hatchery just finished and there's a little bit of creep coming out, you know it's a normal opener. If your SCV gets there and the hatchery is still not done, you know it's pull first. The other reason is because pulling SCVs too early in any matchup, pulling SCVs too early to scout causes you to delay your command center. So if I SCV scout too early with this, or sorry, with a different worker for my mineral line, I could potentially delay my command center a couple of seconds depending on how early I scout. So an example is if I do 17 scout, 18 scout, I might have a 3-second late CC. So if a CC is supposed to be down at 140, like a prime time 140, it might be 143, 144. Okay, so this is important because this is, like I said, like we talked about earlier, in the early game, it could be a lot of little things start adding up that could be messing with your build. So naturally, if I spend 5 seconds extra to get that CC down, I'm missing out 5 seconds worth of mining. My orbital is 5 seconds late, right? So all that stuff, my mule is late, etc., etc. So it's really important to find a balance there. I will say a lot of people, no matter what, are going to like SCV scouting early because it kind of offers like mental ease. So if I send the worker across the map early and I get to scout HEs early, I'm going to feel much better about that and maybe I prefer that return on investment ROI, where I get the earlier scout, and even if my CC's late because I scouted the cheese, I'm feeling like much better. Honestly, one-base cheeses are not very popular, so you also want to think about how often am I getting cheesed on one base to really merit SCV scouting so early every single game. Okay, so you want to think about stuff like that. Now, here you go. Look at that. Perfect. Hatchery just finished. The creep just popped. Now I'm going to rally my Reaper across the map because I know that this is a normal hatch timing. I'm going to rally my CC there to get that factory down. At that Marine. You'll see me mess up the add-ons here. I apologize there. This is not the perfect example that I wanted it to be. But honestly, finding TvZs these days is pretty rare. So second gas, right? But like I said, those kinds of little things, they matter, right? So that's something that in general I should not even be doing. We're going to pressure with the Reaper. Notice I threw the grenade. So let's talk about the grenade. This is a big thing. The grenade. Okay, and let me make sure I'm in frame for this. So with the grenade, the reason why, if you're actually paying attention to pro games, pros tend to save the grenade for when the queen pops to then throw the grenade, auto the first tumor, and kill it. That's the ideal scenario. That's what we're looking for. On maps with ramps, it's much harder to do that, right? Because you have to face check the ramp. You got to go up the ramp. You can't see. So if they're good or they're smart, they'll throw their links down there to mess with you, something like that. And then you're kind of cooked, right? Like you lose the Reaper, you didn't kill the tumor, you can't scout, the disaster. So luckily with this map, a little cliff here, so I can still pressure up here. But the reason why I threw the grenade down is because I knew that I wouldn't really have a good chance of denying the creep tumor. So what I'm going to do instead is maybe try to kill a ling or two, throw a grenade at the drones, right? Disrupt some mining. That's kind of the idea there. But that's why I threw that grenade. So for those who knew about that, that's why I did that. If you didn't know, now you know. The grenade. Maybe I'll put like a big banner. The grenade, in quotes. So now I left the worker, my scouting worker at the third. You don't have to do that because you could just use the Reaper to scout at that point, right? And notice I keep my Reaper across the map. So this may be a bit redundant, a bit pointless. Link speed tends to finish around 320, 330. So as you can see, it's lining up to finish around that time. I'm going to go ahead and swap now. So I'm going to swap this factory. Pop these Hellions out. Notice I'm still keeping the Reaper here. And my wall off. So the build order aspect here is really important. Notice that I'm not going crazy with my Reaper, right? I'm not trying to kill like the drone building the third. I'm not trying to just like go crazy, eat the Reaper into his main, throw a grenade, disrupt some mining, etc., etc., etc. Yes, I could sacrifice my Reaper right now to attempt to scout, right? And there is a likelihood that maybe I do scout a cheese, but there's also a really good likelihood that I die before I even see a cheese, okay? And sometimes it's better to see the units moving across the map. Think about it like a much more secure option, let's say, right? So like, if I wanted to guess if roaches are coming, I need to see exactly where the roach warren is to tell, right? Or maybe I'd have to get lucky and see the roaches come out of the larva or something like that. Personally, I'm really not a big fan of those odds. So keeping the Reaper here and then seeing the units move across the map helps me because I can tell. Like, for example, a Ling Bane flood or a Ling flood, right? Yeah, there's a spawning pool already. So if I stack my Reaper and it's got a spawning pool, I'm not going to think anything about that. And somebody might be prone to just funnel 400 Lings to my natural. Okay? So a really important thing here in the early game is that you cannot prevent everything from happening. Okay? And this is where the little details are important to be consistent with. If I consistently leave my Reaper right here every single game and I don't lose it to like 4 Lings or whatever, I'll be able to scout pretty much every all-in, right, on 2 bases. Ling Flood, Ling Bane, Roach Warren, Ravager, right, something like that. Those could all be scouted without needing to sack my unit and gamble on, oh shit, hope I scout the structure itself, okay? But what I was getting at earlier is that now I can focus on my build order while still maintaining some scouting. So I'm simplifying this a lot, right? Like, even for myself, when I'm playing this game, I'm simplifying it a lot. I know Link Speed's about to finish now, so I'm going to start pulling back. And I also know I have 2 Hellions coming out soon. But I'm going to focus on my build. Okay, this is really, really important. Early game build order execution, guys. Don't go crazy on microing your Hellions, microing your Reaper, microing your Banshees, etc., etc., etc. Because that honestly has so many drawbacks. And all like I've coached so many people at this level between Diamond to Masters, even Masters, and people tend to focus on the wrong things, especially when it comes to those early game harassment units. We all want to be Bjorn. We all want to be Clem. We want to kill 10 drones. We want to kill 2 queens. And sometimes it happens, and it feels really good when it does happen, actually. But most of the time, when people do this, they're floating 1,500 minerals. Their build is all messed up. And, like, you're really betting on getting damage done. And if you don't get damage done, you're just behind, right? Your build is cooked. And then now you gambled on trying to get really good damage done that you just didn't get. So my advice here is to focus entirely on your build first, and then slowly implement a little bit of multitasking in your build. Your build should always come first, right? And you don't need to be the fastest player. You don't need to be have like 400 control groups. You know, I personally, like, very least, I want my students to have camera locations, because that is like one army control group or something like that. That's fine. I used to do the same thing, but one or like no camera locations, dragging everywhere, that's the part that kind of kills me. And that's really important too, because that has a direct impact on how well you can execute your build and do multitasking, right? Because if you have to kind of drag your screen everywhere, that's a big thing. But I plan on releasing that in a separate video all about mechanics, so we're not going to talk too much about that. But back to the original point, we just want to make sure our build order is extremely crisp as much as we can, right? Like, obviously not going to expect you guys to hit, you know, like pro level macro cycles, etc., but you have to start somewhere, right? And again, you're probably going to get a better return on investment doing your build properly than going crazy on Hellion harass against somebody who maybe at the end of the day they're not even droning and they build 400 lings. I can't even tell you how many times I've seen somebody try to dive their Hellions into the Zerg's natural and diamond, and then this guy comes out with like 30 lings, like for no reason. Like the guy just built a bunch of lings instead of just drones. Okay. So rallying my Hellions across the map. Again, if we look at my POV here, focusing on that build. So I'm gonna go for Banshees there. Cloak. Okay. I'm moving my Hellions around, but I'm not in their face. Okay, now I have a bit more RAM because I've started a Cloak. I've built my depot. I have my Banshee. I can macro while I'm not looking at my production cycles. So now I'm gonna start focusing on that, scouting that little bit of pressure, right? Okay, I pull my Hellions back. Notice right here, I pulled my Hellions back. I start stim. Okay, this is like the most important thing in the early game that you can do, guys. Please. And honestly, I shouldn't have even left it under the Overlord. When you're gonna go back to your base to do things, just pull your Hellions away. There is no reason to leave them in the front while you're doing something and then having it die, and then you're just like out of luck, right? So please do that. It honestly makes a huge difference, okay? Okay, so we're gonna move around here with the Hellions, right? Again, I'm not going crazy. I'm applying pressure, clearly, right? Because he's got to keep rotating his queens to accommodate that, right? Those Hellions. But I'm always prioritizing my build order first. Always going to be top priority. Okay, now my Banshee's coming out, so it's going to get a little bit more difficult, right? With the multitask. This is like, yeah, that wall is kind of weird. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll build it here. And then I'll build 2 bays there. Okay, I got 300 minerals, 2 barracks. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to do some multitasking. For this part, I would say when your Banshees are out, if you're telling like 3cc Banshee or 3cc Banshee or 2cc Banshee, right? With 2cc Banshee, you send your first Banshee across the map usually, but with 3cc Banshee, you wait for the 2 and then you go across the map. So in either scenario, I advise pulling the Hellions back and then focusing on the Banshees. If you're looking specifically for drone kills, focus on the Banshees, but try not to use both at the same time. Okay, once your build is like crisp, then you can start, like I said earlier, implementing a little bit of multitask. Try to get your build smoothed out. Okay, so really prioritize that as much as you can, and then once your build is good, shift to this, add a little bit of multitasking. But even for myself, like look here, I can't even do it. Like I'm building 2 eBays, add-ons, using my Hellions, and then trying to use the Banshee. It's not easy. Okay, so now I'm shifting my attention to the Banshees. Okay, doing my build. Just trying to see where I can get drone damage. Okay, I pull my Banshee away from the Spore, and then I do my swapping, okay? And don't feel bad You know, like, this is something that's going to take a lot of practice, especially if you have a habit of not doing it. But it's going to, once you burn it into your memory, you're not going to need to think about it. And that's great because then it makes you faster. You can start allocating mental RAM to other things without needing to think about little details that I mentioned earlier. Okay, I see a 5th. That's a normal time, so I feel pretty good. And, you know, here, for example, like, I'm making a mistake, right? I didn't really start combat shows right away. Maybe this barracks wasn't producing submarines. I decided to go mine first, orbital on the way. And, you know, now I want to take my 3rd, so I'm going to send my Hellions home. And I'm just going to work on my Banshees. All right, there you go. I think I'm checking for that base. Okay, I lied. I think I'm being more aggressive. Look at me go. Don't do this at home, kids. You don't need to go crazy like this. Again, this is actually a good example of what to do when you want to start throwing in more of that multitasking. Right, I see the queens on the opposite side, so I'm going to pressure there. Okay, but if we're honest here, I really didn't do a whole lot, right? I didn't kill a crazy amount of workers. I haven't lost anything, which is nice. I did force some spores, I suppose. But if we're talking about or considering just raw damage, I really didn't do anything special. Okay, but that's okay because our build is crisp. Okay, and I didn't gamble on trying to go crazy with my Banshees. My opponent defended well. You know, there's also not a whole lot of Hellion avenues and like anything crazy I could do on this map as well. So that's also okay. Now I'm gonna get ready for my 1-1 push. I send my Marine Mine across. This is actually, I feel like I macroed well, and I feel like the early game wasn't too bad. So I did this. Okay, my Marine Mine push. Usually when the game is not that great, I'll shift to a double medevac. Okay, so, and you guys are at a level where this is probably like pretty obvious. You all know 1-1, 730, Marines. You either go tank or you go mine first, right? If you go mine first, it's not really that good against roaches, but it would be good against Ling Bane, right? So you guys all know this push. So for this push, I'm usually a lot more aggressive with it if I know I had a good early game. Now you guys know when you have a good early game and when you won't, right? If you're hitting the supply here about 120, even like 130 at 730, that's good. That means you hit a really crisp build, and if you feel comfortable pushing with everything across the map, you could. Technically you could, because you at least have the supply. Micro, all that stuff, engagements, that's going to be another thing that we'll talk about. Those will obviously play a factor in whether or not you win the game at this point. But this right here, there's a simple idea of when to push directly down the middle. That's what you're looking for, okay? If your 1-1 finishes at 730 or so, and you got a good supply, that between 120 to 130, you're in a good spot. Okay, obviously here, my opponent defended well there. My mines didn't get like crazy connections, and that's okay, right? That's completely fine. I'm going to go ahead and start doing a bit more multitasking. I will say for this, something that I could have done better was definitely follow up with the 3rd and 4th medevac faster. I think I didn't build them at all, so they're late. Okay, so see things like that. Like that's something that I should have done. Now I'm gonna start split pushing. Split pushing really comes in when for example, there I didn't have a good trade, right? It wasn't horrible. Like I didn't end up losing the game because of that trade, right? And they're not necessarily winning either, like super ahead or anything like that. But I don't have momentum. Okay, so now I need to create momentum. So how do I create momentum? We're going to talk more about this in the other video, the second part to this video. But momentum is going to come from trading here, okay? From the multi-prong, specifically this right here and this right here, the medevac and the mines, etc. Right? That's the advantage of going mine first, is that you can do this. You can start pressuring on multiple fronts, and you can just pick up and fly away. Siege tanks, more expensive, a lot more committed, and that's why siege tank pushes tend to be big army on one side entirely. Right, maybe like one little bit of harassment or something like that, but you tend to push down the middle or even on the side. You're a lot more direct with it. I would have been much more aggressive down the middle, like super eager to secure the game if I had felt like I had a very good trade early on, but I did not. So I'm playing this game from a very like standard normal game where no one really has an insane advantage. But there, for example, we see that's a nice trade. Now I'm building some more momentum. So now I'm going to get even bolder. I'm like, okay, that was a good trade. Let me see what I can do in the main now. Send something to the 3rd. you know, and like try to draw his attention. Obviously, there I lost my medevac, so stuff like that will happen where then you have to reconsider, like, okay, now I need to find another way to rebuild that momentum. Okay, so we did dive a little bit more into the mid game, but otherwise, that's it for this video, guys. So this is specifically early game. In the next video, mid game, I'm going to spend a lot more time focusing on engagements, transitioning, what kind of compositions against what. But this at its core is just a very simple, easy way to follow and understand TvZ early game and what to prioritize when you're playing. Okay, so like we mentioned earlier, prioritize your build. Don't go crazy on harassment. Okay, so don't force yourself to multitask like crazy. Get a nice solid build. Don't feel like you need to be killing tons of units with harassment. And honestly, guys, at your guys' level, if you get a really crisp build and you get a good fight across the map, you're going to win your games 9 times out of 10, right? If it gets a little bit tricky, maybe that first fight doesn't go too well, that's where that mid-game video will come in. You can start to see like what to do when that happens. But at the core, at the simplest terms, good early game build, good early game execution equals the option, like the potential to have a good early game push to win the game. And like I was trying to say is that a lot of times people at your level on the opposing team, right? For example, the Zerg here is going to make some macro mistakes, right? They're not going to play perfect. And if they don't play perfect or they don't play well or they mess up the early game and your early game is really good, you're more likely to win in the first like 8 minutes, right? 8 to 10 minutes or even, yeah, actually, no, like even like 7:30, it's like 9:30. Okay. Then obviously if you guys make mistakes on both fronts, then the game's going to drag out a little bit longer. And that tends to be the case, right? That's why games at lower levels tend to last a lot longer. It's just less, I call it like playing tennis. It's just like throwing the game on both sides, okay? But yeah, so if you guys have any other questions, obviously leave it in the comments. I made a video like this before. This is more of a follow-up and a more, how do I say, like overarching concepts. If you're interested in getting some coaching, I do offer coaching, and I'm actually having a sale now. So coaching is at $25 an hour. I'll leave the information in the description box. Sorry, so if you're interested in getting something more in-depth, more personal, feel free to reach out there. But otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video.